The interspecies combat training facility on Apex 7 was, by all measurable standards, a monument to galactic civilization. Suspended in the neutral zone between three major star systems, it floated there like a giant metallic flower, all gleaming surfaces and geometric precision. Inside its pressurized halls, warriors from 47 different species learned the art of what the Galactic Concordance diplomatically called conflict resolution through regulated physical engagement. Which was, of course, a fancy way of saying fighting without starting another interstellar war. The facility prided itself on being the pinnacle of controlled aggression. Everything was measured, monitored, and meticulously documented. Heart rates, hormone levels, strike force, reaction times. All recorded and analyzed by algorithms so advanced they could predict when a Drantine was about to lose their temper approximately 7 seconds before the Drantine themselves realized it. The whole place hummed with the kind of sterile efficiency that made you wonder if anyone actually enjoyed working there, or if they were all just really committed to the aesthetic of professional violence. It had been running smoothly for 43 cycles. Then the humans showed up. Now, to be fair to humanity, their integration into the galactic community had been relatively peaceful. Sure, there was that incident with the Karathi trade delegation and the misunderstanding about handshakes versus threat displays. And yes, someone probably should have warned the humans that bringing carnivorous pets to a station with insectoid representatives was considered somewhere between rude and actively hostile. But overall, humans had proven themselves to be adequate spacefaring citizens. They followed most of the rules, paid their docking fees on time, and only occasionally caused diplomatic incidents. The Combat Academy had welcomed its first human recruits with the kind of cautious optimism typically reserved for introducing a new food item to a notoriously picky eater. The instructors had reviewed humanity's file, noted their lack of natural armor, their middling strength compared to most warrior species, and their bizarre dependence on a single type of atmospheric composition. They'd seen the psychological profiles suggesting humans were surprisingly adaptable and emotionally complex, which in galactic administrative speak meant we don't really understand them, but they seem mostly harmless. The training complex itself was a masterpiece of unnecessary sophistication. Zero-gravity chambers that could simulate combat on 17 different planetary environments. Holographic opponents that adapted to your fighting style in real time. Medical bays equipped with regeneration technology that could regrow a severed limb in under an hour, though the facility's safety record meant they'd only had to use it twice in their entire operational history. Both times, coincidentally, involved Drantines, who got a bit too enthusiastic during territorial dispute simulations. Commander Velrax, the facility's administrator, and a Thelosian whose species had evolved past physical conflict approximately 6,000 years ago, often gave tours to visiting dignitaries. He would gesture grandly at the training floors, visible through observation windows, his translucent skin rippling with what might have been pride, or possibly just the station's environmental controls acting up again. "Here," he would say in his resonant, multi-tonal voice. "We transform instinct into discipline. We channel aggression into artistry. We take the base urge to dominate and refine it into something approaching elegance." It was a nice speech. He'd practiced it extensively. What he didn't mention was that most species who came to Apex 7 didn't really have that many base urges left to channel. Evolution, genetic modification, or simple cultural development had smoothed out the rougher edges of violence for most of the galaxy. The Karathi had meditation techniques. The Drantines had aggression inhibitors they could trigger at will. Even the Vrexian hive mind species approached combat with a kind of mathematical detachment that made chess look emotionally charged by comparison. Then again, Commander Velrax had never had to explain human psychology to anyone. Lucky him. That particular joy fell to the training staff. Marcus Venn was exactly the kind of human that made galactic recruitment officers feel confident about their decisions. Average height for his species, at least according to the database, with a build that suggested regular exercise without obsessive dedication. Brown hair kept in a practical shortcut. Brown eyes that didn't seem to contain any particular fire or ambition. And a resting expression that could best be described as mildly attentive. His psychological evaluation had come back clean, his physical scores were adequate, and his interview had been so unremarkably polite that the recruitment officer had actually forgotten about it by the time Marcus left the room. Perfect. Exactly the kind of human they wanted. Controllable. Predictable. Safe. Marcus had arrived at Apex 7 3 weeks ago, processed through orientation with all the other recruits, and had been assigned to Training Squadron Theta 9. His squadmates included 2 Karathi warriors, whose exoskeletons gleamed like polished obsidian. A Thalosian transfer student who was only there because their family wanted them to understand primitive species better. 3 Vrexians who functioned as a single combat unit. And 1 very large, very confident Drantine named Krell Thaxos. If Marcus was the poster child for human averageness, Krell was the Drantine equivalent of a propaganda hologram. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, with scales that shifted between deep green and aggressive red depending on his mood, which was usually some variation of aggressive. His species had earned their place in the Concordance, through a combination of military prowess and the kind of stubborn determination that made even peaceful negotiations feel like combat. Drantines were natural warriors. Everyone knew that. They had instincts honed by millennia of evolution on a death world where everything, including the plants, was trying to kill you. Krell's combat record was impressive. 12 official tournament victories, certified in 9 different fighting styles, and a recommendation from his clan leader that used words like fierce, dedicated, and occasionally concerning, but in a productive way. He wore his achievements like his scales, proud and prominently displayed. He'd taken one look at Marcus during their first training session and dismissed him entirely. Just another soft primate. Probably here because humanity was trying to prove they belonged among warriors. Krell had sparred with humans before during interstation competitions. They were quick, he'd give them that, and surprisingly good at adapting to new techniques. But they lacked the raw power of a true predator species. They tired too easily. Their bones broke if you hit them hard enough. Marcus, for his part, had nodded politely when introduced to Krell, said something unremarkable like, "Looking forward to training with you," and then proceeded to be exactly as average as his file suggested. He followed instructions adequately. He didn't complain about the rigorous schedule. He helped the Vrexians understand human idioms when they got confused about warm-up protocols. He was, in every measurable way, perfectly ordinary. The training staff appreciated ordinary. Ordinary didn't start interspecies incidents. Lieutenant Zara Kelvin was not ordinary, but she'd learned to pretend adequately enough that most people missed the difference. As one of 3 humans on the facility's instruction staff, she occupied a strange middle ground between the recruits and the established galactic hierarchy. She was technically an assistant combat instructor, which meant she taught the basics, supervised sparring sessions, and tried to prevent the kind of misunderstandings that ended with someone filing a formal complaint with the Concordance Ethics Committee. She'd earned her position the hard way. 2 years of proving herself in combat simulations, another year of cultural sensitivity training that mostly consisted of learning which gestures were friendly and which ones meant you'd accidentally declared a blood feud with someone's entire genetic line. and then 6 months of practical instruction under Velrax's increasingly nervous supervision. Humans, it turned out, were decent teachers. They had patience, probably developed from dealing with their own species' chaos, and an ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms. Zara was good at her job. Good enough that even the more traditional instructors had stopped questioning her presence. She ran her sessions with efficiency, corrected form without being condescending, and had an instinct for de-escalating tensions before they became problems. Her students respected her, mostly because she could demonstrate every technique she taught, and because she'd once pinned a Drantine lieutenant who'd gotten too aggressive during a sparring session, holding him immobilized until he acknowledged the lesson. That Drantine hadn't been Krell, but Krell had heard about it. He'd filed it away in whatever mental category Drantines used for potential threats, and then proceeded to treat Zara with the bare minimum of professional courtesy required to avoid official reprimand, which meant he followed her instructions during training, but added just enough hesitation to make it clear he didn't really consider her an authority figure. Zara had dealt with worse. You didn't grow up human without learning how to handle people who underestimated you. She'd noticed Marcus during his first week, mostly because he was so unremarkable that it was almost remarkable. Most new recruits either tried too hard to prove themselves or spent the first few sessions looking overwhelmed by the alien technology and species diversity. Marcus did neither. He showed up on time, performed adequately, asked clarifying questions when needed, and never drew attention to himself. She'd reviewed his file out of curiosity. Standard background. Joined the Concordance Exchange Program after graduating from some military academy on Earth. No disciplinary issues. No outstanding commendations either. Just a steady record of acceptable performance. His psychological evaluation mentioned something about well-regulated emotional responses and Gua Yingxing Qiang, which the translation algorithm had rendered as Gua Yingxing Qiang, which the algorithm then sheepishly corrected to highly adaptive. Zara had made a mental note to keep an eye on him. Not because he seemed problematic, but because humans who were too well adjusted sometimes weren't. She'd seen it before, the ones who kept everything locked down tight until something specific triggered them. But weeks had passed, and Marcus remained consistently, almost aggressively normal. Which is why what happened on training day 47 caught everyone so completely off guard. The session started like any other. Squadron Theta 9 assembled in Training Bay 5, a multi-purpose chamber currently configured for close-quarters combat drills in variable gravity. The day's exercise focused on grappling techniques in zero-G environments, which was always entertaining because half the species in the galaxy had never evolved in conditions where up was a suggestion rather than a rule. Zara ran through the warm-up protocols, checking that everyone's safety harnesses were properly calibrated and that the medical monitors were reading correctly. The Vrexians were already floating in perfect formation, their hive mind coordination giving them an unfair advantage in zero-G that the other students grumbled about regularly. The Karathi were practicing their breathing exercises. The Thalosian student was checking their datapad with the kind of bored expression that suggested they'd rather be literally anywhere else. And Marcus was stretching in that methodical way humans did before physical activity. Krell was hovering near the edge of the training area, his scales flickering between green and amber, which meant he was excited. He'd been looking forward to this session. Zero-G grappling played to Drantine advantages. Their species had evolved in high-gravity environments, which meant their muscle density was significantly higher than most species. In zero-G, that translated to devastating momentum once they got moving. "Pair up," Zara called out, her voice carrying through the bay's audio system. "Remember, this is about technique, not force. If you rely on strength alone up here, you'll just tire yourself out. Use your opponent's momentum. Control your rotation. And for the love of whatever deity your species worships, don't forget that there's no ground to catch you if you lose orientation. The students began pairing off. The Vrexians, as always, worked together as one unit. The Karathi paired with each other, their exoskeletons clicking in what might have been conversation or possibly just the alien equivalent of cracking knuckles. The Thalosian student half-heartedly partnered with one of the other recruits. That left Marcus and Krell. They'd sparred before. It always went the same way. Krell would demonstrate superior strength and reach. Marcus would use footwork and timing to avoid getting completely dominated. And they'd both learn something about cross-species combat techniques. Professional, educational, exactly what the training was designed to produce. Zara activated the gravity reducers, and suddenly everyone was floating. The Vrexians immediately began their drill with mechanical precision. The Karathi tumbled briefly before finding their equilibrium. The Thalosian student did the bare minimum to look engaged. Marcus and Krell faced each other in the designated sparring zone, their safety harnesses glowing with soft blue light to indicate active monitoring. Krell's scales shifted fully to red, his species' way of signaling combat readiness. Marcus simply floated there, arms loose, watching. The drill began. To Krell's credit, he started professionally enough. A straightforward grapple attempt, testing Marcus's reaction time in 0G. Marcus deflected smoothly, using a rotation technique Zara had taught them last week. They separated, drifted, came together again. Krell tried a different approach, a feint followed by a limb lock. Marcus slipped it, barely, his expression focused but calm. They cycled through several exchanges. Krell was clearly the stronger fighter, his mass and power giving him significant advantages. But Marcus was adapting quickly, learning to redirect Krell's momentum rather than meeting it head-on. It was actually a decent demonstration of proper technique. Then Krell started getting frustrated. Zara noticed it immediately. The shift in his scales from combat red to the deeper crimson that indicated aggression. The way his movements became less controlled, more forceful. She'd seen it before with Drantine students. They were natural warriors, yes, but that also meant they had pride. And pride didn't like being stymied by someone smaller and weaker. "Control your aggression, Krell," she called out, pushing off from the wall to get a better angle. This is technique training, not a dominance display. Krell's scales flickered, acknowledging her instruction without really accepting it. He reset his position, facing Marcus again. The next exchange was harder, faster. Krell wasn't trying to demonstrate technique anymore. He was trying to win. Marcus adapted, his expression still neutral but his movements sharper. He avoided a grab that would have given Krell a significant advantage, countered with a joint lock that Krell powered through with raw strength. They spun in the 0G environment, a tangle of limbs and momentum. Zara pushed off to intervene, following proper instructor protocol. When a sparring session escalated beyond training parameters, you separated the participants before someone got hurt or violated safety guidelines. She was already calling for a pause through the bay's communication system as she approached the pair. She reached them mid-grapple, both fighters oriented perpendicular to what used to be the floor. Krell had Marcus in an attempted headlock that Marcus was working to slip. Zara grabbed Krell's arm, the standard touch signal for immediate cessation. Break. Reset positions. Krell, you're letting emotion dictate your... Krell, still locked in combat focus, tried to adjust his grip on Marcus. His other hand shot out, fingers splaying for purchase. And because spatial awareness in 0G was difficult, and because Krell was moving on instinct rather than thought, and because the universe has a terrible sense of timing. His hand tangled in Zara's hair and yanked. Not a light tug, not an accidental brush, a full, forceful pull that snapped her head back and sent pain shooting across her scalp. Everything stopped. Not metaphorically. The entire training bay went silent. The Vrexians halted their drill mid-rotation. The Karathi stopped mid-strike, their exoskeletons freezing in place. The Thalosian student looked up from their datapad for the first time in 20 minutes. Even the facility's environmental systems seemed to pause. The gentle hum of air circulation suddenly audible in the absence of any other sound. Zara's expression didn't change much. A slight tightening around her eyes, a quick intake of breath. She'd been hurt worse during training. This was barely worth noting on a physical level. But Marcus's expression did change. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching closely. His eyes, which had been focused and alert during the sparring, went flat. Not empty, but something worse. Present and seeing and processing with the kind of cold clarity that had nothing to do with combat training and everything to do with something much more fundamental. His body, which had been controlled and measured throughout the session, went completely still. Not the stillness of rest or even the stillness of focused attention. The absolute predatory stillness of something deciding whether you were prey. The facility's biometric sensors, those sophisticated algorithms that monitored every participant's vital signs, started registering anomalies. Marcus's heart rate, which had been elevated but steady during the sparring, spiked and then dropped into a rhythm the computer didn't recognize. His hormone levels shifted in ways that made the monitoring AI flag him for immediate review. His muscle tension patterns changed, triggering alerts about potential medical distress. None of those readings looked like medical distress. They looked like a different kind of stress entirely. The kind evolution designed into persistence predators who ran their prey to exhaustion across savanna plains. The kind that lurked in humanity's genetic memory from when they were neither the biggest nor the strongest, but survived anyway, through sheer, relentless determination. Zara saw it happen, recognized it, even though she'd never seen Marcus like this before. She'd seen other humans make this transition, back on Earth, usually in situations that had gone very wrong very quickly. The moment when civilization became optional and something older took over. She also knew, with absolute certainty, that she needed to make a decision in the next 3 seconds or this situation would escalate beyond anyone's ability to control it. "Krell," she said, her voice remarkably steady, considering her hair was still tangled in his grip and her scalp was screaming, "Let go! Now!" Krell, finally registering what he'd done, released her immediately. His scales flickered with confusion and the beginning of what might have been embarrassment. "Apologies, Lieutenant. I didn't mean to. I was adjusting my position and—" He didn't get to finish the explanation. Marcus moved, not with the measured, controlled movements he'd used during training, not with the careful technique Zara had taught them. He moved with efficiency, zero wasted motion, every action flowing into the next with the kind of precision that looked almost choreographed, except it was far too fast for conscious thought. His hand locked onto Krell's extended arm, the one that had just released Zara. His legs, both of them, wrapped around Krell's torso in a body triangle that would have been impressive for its technical execution if it hadn't been delivered with enough force to crack Krell's ribs. In 0G, momentum was everything, and Marcus had just generated enough of it to send them both spinning toward the far wall of the training bay. Krell, to his credit, reacted quickly. He was a trained warrior, combat certified, with instincts honed by both genetics and practice. He tried to break the hold, using a counter technique that should have worked against an opponent without significant strength advantage. It didn't work. Marcus adjusted, his grip shifting with Krell's counter movement, his entire body functioning as a single unit, designed to control and incapacitate. They hit the wall at an angle, and Marcus used the impact to transition to a different position, one arm now around Krell's throat in a choke that wasn't quite illegal in training, but was definitely beyond the bounds of acceptable sparring. The biometric sensors were screaming now, multiple alerts cascading across the monitoring station. Krell's oxygen levels were dropping. His scales had shifted to a mottled pattern of red and black that indicated genuine distress. The facility's safety protocols should have deployed emergency restraints or flooded the bay with sedative gas. They didn't trigger. Later investigation would reveal that Marcus, in that initial movement, had somehow damaged both his own safety harness and Krell's, disabling the automatic intervention systems. Whether it was intentional or just incredibly unlucky remained unclear. "Marcus, stand down." Zara's voice cut through the bay, authoritative and clear. She'd pushed off from her position, was moving to intervene again. Marcus didn't respond, didn't acknowledge. He was focused entirely on Krell, and the expression on his face was the most frightening thing Zara had ever seen, precisely because it wasn't angry or emotional or out of control. It was focused, purposeful, almost calm. Krell tried another counter, this one involving a joint manipulation that should have forced Marcus to release or risk having his arm broken. Marcus rode through the pain without sound, without reaction, and transitioned again. Now they were separated, floating in the zero-G environment. Krell gasping and disoriented, Marcus already moving to re-engage. The Vrexians, moving with their characteristic coordination, tried to intercede. All three of them approached in a standard containment formation designed to restrain a hostile combatant without injury. Marcus evaded the first one with a rotation that showed perfect spatial awareness. Used the second one's momentum to propel himself toward Krell. The third Vrexian actually managed to grab his leg, a proper hold that should have immobilized him. Marcus kicked backward without looking, his heel connecting with the Vrexian's thorax with enough force to trigger the alien's automatic pain response. The Vrexian released him, floating away while their chittering distress call echoed through the bay. The facility's security system finally registered the escalation. 2 security officers entered through the bay's auxiliary airlock, both wearing reinforced combat suits and carrying restraint equipment. They'd been trained for this kind of situation. Recruit goes unstable. You contain them quickly and efficiently, minimize harm to all parties. They approached Marcus with professional caution, one from each side, timing their advance to catch him between them. Marcus saw them coming, factored them into his movement pattern, continued toward Krell. The first security officer reached him, magnetic grip deploying to lock onto Marcus's shoulder. It was standard equipment, rated to restrain combatants up to Drantine mass levels. Marcus twisted in a way that the security officer later described as anatomically concerning, slipping the grip with damage to his own shoulder that the medical sensors registered as a partial dislocation. He ignored it completely. The second security officer deployed a neural disruptor, a non-lethal device that should have overwhelmed Marcus's nervous system with targeted electromagnetic pulses. Should have. The device activated, the pulses hit their target, and Marcus's body spasmed in response. For approximately 1.5 seconds. Then he adapted, his nervous system compensating in ways that made the station's medical AI file an emergency research request, because that shouldn't have been biologically possible. He reached Krell again. This time there was no grappling, no technique demonstration, no training protocol. Marcus hit Krell with the kind of sustained, methodical violence that made everyone watching understand that humans had not, in fact, evolved past their aggressive instincts. They'd just gotten really, really good at pretending. Krell fought back. He was bigger, stronger, had every physical advantage. It didn't matter. Marcus was operating on something that transcended physical advantage, fighting with a kind of relentless efficiency that came from a species that survived by being too stubborn to die. Zara had seen enough. Everyone out. Clear the bay. Now. She was already moving, not toward the fight, but toward the bay's main control panel. Her fingers flew across the interface, overriding safety protocols with her instructor access codes. The other students didn't need to be told twice. The Vrexians retreated as a unit, carrying their injured third. The Karathi scrambled for the exit with impressive speed. The Thalosian student had already left, their survival instincts apparently functional despite their general air of disaffected boredom. The security officers fell back to the observation area, recognizing that they were out of their depth. One of them was already calling for backup, requesting sedatives rated for aggressive species. Zara activated the gravity. It wasn't the smooth, gradual restoration that safety protocols demanded. It was an emergency full-gravity snap that sent everyone still in the bay, crashing downward. Marcus and Krell, locked together in mid-combat, fell 8 feet and hit the training mat hard enough to trigger impact sensors. They hit together, Krell on the bottom absorbing most of the impact, Marcus on top transitioning instantly from zero-G combat to standard gravity fighting. His elbow found Krell's face. Once, twice, 3 times. Each strike delivered with precision, targeting vulnerable points that shouldn't have been vulnerable on a species with armored scales, but somehow were when hit at the right angle with the right force. Krell's attempts at defense became weaker. His scales shifted to patterns that indicated pain, submission, desperate survival instinct. Marcus didn't stop. Zara dropped from the observation area, falling the full distance and rolling with the landing in a way that would have made her old instructors proud. She came up running, covering the distance to the fight in seconds. "Marcus, stand down. That's an order." Nothing. He might as well have been deaf. She reached them, grabbed Marcus's arm mid-strike, and used a pressure point technique that should have disrupted his concentration enough to break his focus. He turned on her. For exactly half a second, Zara found herself looking into eyes that didn't recognize her as an authority figure, an instructor, or even a fellow human. Just as another target, another obstacle between him and whatever primal purpose was driving him. Then recognition flickered back. Human cognition reasserting itself over whatever had taken control. His arm, pulled back for a strike he'd barely stopped himself from throwing, trembled with the effort of restraint. "She pulled your hair," Marcus said, his voice rough and strange. He pulled her hair. Not Krell. Not even Drantine. He. The depersonalization, absolute. "I know," Zara said, keeping her voice steady and her grip firm on his arm. "I know. And I'm fine. Look at me, Marcus. I'm fine." His eyes tracked to her face, struggling to focus. The flatness was fading, replaced by something more human, but also more disturbed. Like waking up from a dream you didn't remember falling into. He pulled, "I know. And you responded. And now you're going to stand down, because I'm giving you a direct order and you're going to follow it. Aren't you?" The question hung there. The entire bay hung there, really. Everyone in the observation area watching to see if human consciousness or human instinct would win this particular battle. Marcus's breathing, which had been perfectly controlled throughout the fight, hitched. Once, twice, then regulated into something approximating normal. His grip on Krell loosened. His body, coiled for further violence, began to relax by degrees. "Yes, Lieutenant," he said finally, the words emerging like they had to travel a long distance to reach his mouth. Standing down. He stood, moving carefully like someone who wasn't entirely sure their body would obey commands. Stepped back from Krell, who was conscious but seriously injured, his scales showing damage patterns that would take medical intervention to properly heal. The security officers moved in immediately, restraints ready, but Zara waved them off. "Medical team, first, get Krell to the bay. Then we'll deal with everything else." The medical team, which had been standing by with a kind of nervous energy that suggested they'd never had to treat injuries from actual combat before, rushed in with their equipment. They loaded Krell onto an anti-grav stretcher, already deploying cellular regenerators to stabilize his more serious injuries. Marcus stood perfectly still, his hands at his sides, his expression returning to something almost resembling his usual neutral baseline. Except now there was a hollowness to it, like a mask put back on after being forcibly removed. Zara studied him for a long moment. "Medical bay? Full evaluation. You're not under arrest, but you're definitely under observation until we figure out what the hell just happened here." "Understood, Lieutenant." He walked toward the exit with security escort, moving normally, looking completely unlike someone who just dismantled a warrior species member with extreme prejudice. The other students parted to let him through, and Zara noticed how they backed away. Not just giving space, but creating distance. The kind of instinctive recoil that comes from witnessing something that contradicts your understanding of how the world works. After everyone had cleared out except her and Commander Velrax, who'd apparently materialized during the chaos, the Thalosian commander turned to her with an expression that approximated profound confusion. "Lieutenant Kelvin, would you care to explain what precisely I just witnessed?" Zara took a breath, considering how to phrase this in a way that wouldn't sound completely insane to someone whose species had evolved past physical violence before developing space travel. "Sir, I believe what you witnessed was a human cultural response to a severe social transgression being triggered in a high-stress environment, resulting in a temporary regression to evolutionarily older behavioral patterns." Velrax's skin rippled in a way that indicated he was processing this information and finding it thoroughly unsatisfactory. "That was not a cultural response, Lieutenant. That was attempted murder." "No, sir. If it had been attempted murder, Krell would be dead." Marcus was... She paused, searching for words. "Administering correction. From his perspective, Krell committed an act of disrespect serious enough to warrant physical response. By pulling your hair, accidentally. It wasn't about the accidental nature, sir. It was about the act itself. Hair pulling in human social dynamics is considered deeply disrespectful, particularly when done to a female by a male in a combat context. It carries implications of dominance, sexual aggression, and violation of personal dignity that don't translate well to other species. Velrax made a sound that his translation matrix rendered as profound skepticism. "So your species responds to social disrespect with extreme violence?" "Not always, not even usually, but humans have triggers. Social rules that, when violated, can provoke responses disproportionate to the actual harm caused. It's part of our evolutionary heritage. We're a social species that relied on strict behavioral codes for survival. When those codes are violated in certain ways, particularly in contexts that mimic ancestral threat patterns, we can default to older behavioral subroutines. That is terrifying, Lieutenant." "Yes, sir. It is." They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the training bay, where droplets of Krell's blood marked the mat in dark patterns. "I'll need to file a full report," Velrax said finally, "and we'll need to review humanity's presence in this program." "I understand, sir. For what it's worth, this is the first incident of this kind we've had. That you know of." Zara couldn't argue with that. Over the next several hours, as Krell underwent medical treatment and Marcus sat through psychological evaluation, the facility's administrative staff did something they should have done before accepting human recruits. They conducted a comprehensive review of human behavioral patterns, social structures, and evolutionary history. What they found was enlightening and horrifying. Mostly horrifying. Humans, it turned out, were not like most spacefaring species. Most species that achieved interstellar travel had evolved past their aggressive phases, either through natural selection, favoring cooperation, or through deliberate genetic modification, or through cultural development that rendered violence obsolete. They became spacefaring because they'd solved the problem of intraspecies conflict. Humans had become spacefaring despite not solving it. They'd just gotten good at suppressing it. The research files painted a picture of a species that was, by galactic standards, absolutely terrifying. A persistence predator that could track prey for days without stopping. A social omnivore that formed complex hierarchies and enforced them through violence. A tool-using species that had developed increasingly efficient methods of killing its own kind and had only recently decided that maybe that wasn't the best approach. Their entire civilization was essentially an agreement not to act on their instincts. A collective decision to pretend they weren't what they were. And like any pretense, it could fail under the right conditions. The psychological evaluator working with Marcus was a Karathi named Click 13, chosen because Karathi psychology was considered the most comprehensive in the concordance. They sat across from Marcus in a comfortable evaluation room, their exoskeleton clicking softly as they reviewed the biometric data from the incident. "I need you to understand," Click 13 said carefully, "that I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to understand what happened so we can prevent it from happening again." Marcus, who'd been sitting quietly for the past 20 minutes, nodded. "I understand." "Good. Now, walk me through your thought process during the incident. Start from when Instructor Kelvin intervened in your sparring session." "I don't remember having a thought process." Click 13's antennae twitched. "You don't remember thinking?" "I remember seeing Krell grab her hair. I remember realizing he'd hurt her. And then I remember Lieutenant Kelvin ordering me to stand down." Marcus paused, his expression troubled. "Everything between those points is fragmented. I remember movement, positioning, evaluating threats, but not in words. More like impulses that I followed." "Did you want to kill Krell?" "I don't know. Maybe. I wanted him to stop being a threat. I wanted him to understand that what he'd done was unacceptable. He trailed off, struggling. "I wanted to enforce consequences for accidentally pulling someone's hair during training. It wasn't an accident. He was frustrated, losing control, and he lashed out. Maybe he didn't mean to grab her hair specifically, but he meant to be aggressive. He meant to assert dominance, and that's not acceptable." "Why not? Isn't that what training is for? Learning to handle aggressive opponents?" Marcus looked at Click 13 for a long moment. "Have you ever had someone larger and stronger than you assert physical dominance over you in a way that had nothing to do with fair competition and everything to do with making you know your place?" "My species doesn't have those dynamics." "Right. Well, humans do. And we have very specific, very strong responses to them. Krell didn't just pull her hair, he violated a social contract. And when you violate the contract, you don't get to benefit from its protections anymore. Click 13 made notes, their manipulator appendages moving rapidly across their datapad. This social contract, is it written down somewhere? Part of human legal codes? Not really. It's just understood. You don't put your hands on someone like that. You don't assert dominance through casual violence, especially not towards someone smaller or in a position where they're vulnerable. And if you do, consequences happen. Consequences administered by whom? By whoever is present and capable, by the group, by society, by... Marcus gestured vaguely. By people who see it happen and decide it's not acceptable. So you appointed yourself as consequence enforcer. I didn't appoint anything. I just acted. Based on instinct. Based on something older than instinct. Based on the rules that kept my species alive when we were barely out of the caves. You respect the social contract or you get removed from the society. Simple. Click 13's antennae went still, which in Korathi body language indicated deep thought or profound concern. Possibly both. Marcus, you understand that by galactic standards, what you did constitutes assault with intent to cause serious harm. Yes. And you understand that Krell's action, while inappropriate, was not severe enough to warrant such a response under any concordance regulation? Yes. Yet you don't seem to regret your actions. Marcus considered this carefully. I regret losing control. I regret that it happened in a training environment where people are supposed to be safe. I regret that I probably just ended my participation in this program. He paused. But I don't regret stopping Krell, and I'd do it again if the situation repeated itself. In the medical bay, Krell was having a similar conversation with his clan leader, who'd been contacted immediately after the incident. The conversation was happening via holographic communication, and from Krell's expression, it was not going well. You disrespected a female warrior during training, his clan leader rumbled, the translation matrix rendering the Drantine words into standard with only minimal loss of nuance. And then you were bested by a human half your size. He fought without honor, without technique. He fought like a predator protecting a pack member, exactly as his instincts demanded. You, meanwhile, fought with arrogance and let your frustration dictate your actions. Which of you brought more honor to your species in that moment? Krell's scales flickered with shame. But the human female wasn't injured. It was an accident. An accident born of your lack of control. And even if it was accidental, you violated a social code that you should have been aware of. Did you not receive the briefing on human social dynamics? I may have skipped that section. The clan leader's expression, as much as a Drantine's reptilian features could show expression, conveyed disappointment so profound it crossed species boundaries. You will formally apologize to both humans. You will withdraw your challenge rankings for the next cycle. And you will complete the full cultural sensitivity training before you're permitted to spar with other species again. Do I make myself clear? Yes, clan leader. Good. And Krell? Consider this a lesson in humility. The universe is full of species that don't fight the way we do, that don't value what we value, that don't respond the way we expect. Assuming superiority leads to exactly this kind of defeat. Learn from it or repeat it. Your choice. The communication ended, leaving Krell alone with his injuries and his thoughts, neither of which were particularly comfortable. 3 days later, Commander Velrax called a facility-wide assembly. All instructors, all students, all staff. The kind of mandatory gathering that happened maybe twice a cycle, and usually only for serious announcements. Everyone filed into the main assembly hall, a space large enough to accommodate the facility's diverse population. The humans clustered together instinctively, including Marcus, who'd been cleared by both medical and psychological evaluation, but remained technically suspended pending final review. Zara stood with the other instructors, her expression professionally neutral. Velrax stood at the central podium, his translucent form catching the light in ways that made him look more substantial than usual. "I'm sure," he began, "that everyone is aware of the incident that occurred 3 days ago in Training Bay 5. I'm not going to rehash the details. What I am going to do is address several misconceptions that this incident revealed, both about humans and about this facility's preparedness for training warriors from recently integrated species." He pulled up a holographic display, showing what appeared to be a timeline of galactic species integration. Most species that join the Concordance have evolved past their aggressive phases. They join us because they've achieved a level of civilization that makes cooperation more valuable than conflict. We've built our training protocols around this assumption. He paused. Humans don't fit that pattern. The holographic display shifted, showing comparative data on conflict resolution across species. Humans were a very obvious outlier. Humans achieved space travel while still actively engaged in intraspecies conflict. They developed interstellar capability while simultaneously maintaining standing armies, weapon development programs, and what they call deterrent forces. They came to the Concordance not because they'd evolved past violence, but because they decided to try something different. Velrax gestured to the human section. This makes them unique among our members. It also makes them potentially dangerous in ways we failed to anticipate. But before anyone suggests that humans should be removed from combat training programs, I want you to consider something else that our research revealed. The display changed again, showing humanitarian metrics, cultural exchange data, cooperation indices. Humans are also among the most socially cooperative species in the Concordance. They form alliances easily. They adapt to other species' needs with remarkable flexibility. They have strong instincts for protecting those they consider part of their social group, regardless of species. What happened in Training Bay 5 was not human savagery. It was human loyalty taken to its logical extreme. He looked directly at Marcus. Recruit Ven responded to what he perceived as a threat to someone under his protection. His response was disproportionate by our standards and frightening in its intensity. But it was also, in the context of human social evolution, entirely predictable. We should have predicted it. We didn't. That failure is ours, not his. Murmuring spread through the assembly. The Drontines looked thoughtful. The Karathi were clicking among themselves. The Thalosians seemed simultaneously fascinated and disturbed. Moving forward, Velrax continued, we're implementing new protocols for human participants in combat training. These include stricter monitoring of social dynamics, mandatory cultural education for all species about human behavioral triggers, and immediate intervention procedures for situations that might escalate beyond training parameters. He paused. We're also implementing something the humans call battle buddy protocols, where human recruits are partnered with experienced human personnel who can recognize and diffuse situations before they become incidents. Zara caught Marcus's eye across the room, gave him a small nod that might have been approval or might have been something more complicated. Recruit Ven will not face charges, Velrax announced. His actions, while extreme, were responsive rather than initiated. Recruit Thaxos has acknowledged his role in escalating the situation and will complete remedial training. and all of us will learn from this incident so it doesn't happen again. The assembly continued with additional policy announcements, updated safety protocols, and the kind of administrative details that made everyone's attention wander. But the core message had been delivered. Humans were different, humans were dangerous, and humans were staying. After the assembly, Marcus found Zara waiting for him in the corridor outside the hall. "So," she said without preamble. "That was interesting. Is that what we're calling it? Would you prefer terrifying or career-defining?" Marcus managed a weak smile. "Both, probably. Am I actually cleared to continue training?" "With supervision, yes. Congratulations. You're now the most closely monitored recruit in Concordance history." She started walking, and he fell into step beside her. "For what it's worth, I think Velrax is right. We should have seen this coming. Hair pulling is one of the big ones for humans, right up there with spitting and certain types of touching. Everyone knows that on Earth, but we forgot to mention it to the rest of the galaxy. I didn't know I'd react like that. Most people don't until it happens. That's the thing about triggers, Marcus. They're called triggers because they bypass conscious thought. You didn't decide to attack Krell. You just did, and your brain came up with justifications afterward." She glanced at him. "The question is whether you can learn to recognize the warning signs before you hit that point. And if I can't, then you wash out of the program, go home, and find a career that doesn't involve close quarters combat with species who don't understand that certain actions will make humans want to rip their faces off." She said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. Not everyone's cut out for this. No shame in that. They walked in silence for a while, passing other recruits who gave them a wide berth. Word had spread, as it always did in close communities. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone had opinions about it. "Lieutenant," Marcus said finally, "thank you for stepping in when you did. If I hadn't, you would have killed him, or come close enough that the distinction wouldn't matter." She stopped walking, turned to face him directly. "But here's what you need to understand, Marcus. That thing inside you, that response you had, it's not going away. You can learn to manage it, channel it, keep it leashed. But it's always going to be there. That's what it means to be human in a galaxy full of species who evolved past their demons. We're still carrying ours around, and sometimes they slip the leash." Comforting thought. Wasn't meant to be comforting, meant to be true. She resumed walking. "But here's the other side of that truth. That same instinct that made you attack Krell, that's also the instinct that's made humans survive impossible situations throughout history. It's the reason we're here, walking around a space station in orbit around someone else's planet, talking to aliens about combat training. We're persistence predators who got smart enough to leave Earth, but not smart enough to leave behind what made us dangerous in the first place. You're saying it's a feature, not a bug. I'm saying it's both. And the trick is learning when to use it and when to suppress it, which you're going to have a lot of practice with, because Velrax wasn't kidding about the supervision thing. I'm your new battle buddy, which means I'm going to be watching you like a particularly paranoid hawk for the foreseeable future." Marcus couldn't quite tell if that was supposed to be reassuring or threatening. Possibly both. They reached the residential section, where recruits were housed in species-appropriate quarters. A group of Drantines stood near the entrance, including Krell, who was moving stiffly but had apparently recovered enough to be mobile. His scales were still showing healing patterns, mottled blues and greens that indicated recent trauma. The two groups faced each other across the corridor. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. that familiar physiological response starting to kick in. Before it could progress further, Zara's hand landed on his shoulder, firm and grounding. Krell looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then, with visible effort, he lowered his head in what the translation matrix helpfully identified as a Drantine gesture of respect. "I spoke without understanding," Krell said, his voice rough. "I acted without thinking. You defended your pack member as your instincts demanded. I offer no excuse for provoking that response. It was, by human standards, a pretty good apology. By Drantine standards, based on the reactions of Krell's companions, it was practically unheard of." Marcus, acutely aware of Zara's hand still on his shoulder, and the entire corridor watching this interaction, managed to find words. "I accept your apology, and I apologize for the extent of my response. I should have had better control." "Control is learned," Krell replied. "Instinct is bred. You fought as your nature demanded. There is honor in that, even if there is also terror." He paused, scales flickering with something that might have been humor or possibly just pain medication. "I will not make the mistake of disrespecting your pack again. Appreciate it." The Drantines moved on, and Marcus found he could breathe again. "Well handled," Zara said quietly. "See? You can learn. Slowly, painfully, with extensive supervision. But you can learn. Your confidence is overwhelming. Part of my charm. Come on, you've got remedial cultural sensitivity training in 20 minutes. Wouldn't want you to miss learning about all the other ways humans are terrifying to the rest of the galaxy." As they walked toward the training section, Marcus reflected on the absurdity of his situation. He joined the Concordance exchange program to see the galaxy, learn from other species, and maybe contribute something meaningful to interspecies cooperation. Instead, he'd become a cautionary tale about human psychology and a living example of why evolution was scarier than any horror story. But as he passed through corridors filled with aliens who now gave him respectful distance instead of dismissive glances, who acknowledged his presence instead of overlooking it, he realized something else. Before the incident, he'd been invisible, average, forgettable. Now everyone knew exactly what humans were capable of. They understood that humanity's civilization was a choice, not a default. That human courtesy was a gift, not a weakness. That the quiet human in the corner who never caused problems was quiet because they were choosing to be, not because they couldn't be otherwise. It was, Marcus reflected, a terrible way to earn respect. But it was, nonetheless, respect. The interspecies combat training facility continued its operations, but with a new understanding woven into its protocols. Humans were different. Humans were dangerous. And humans, when properly motivated, could turn training exercises into survival situations with the kind of speed that made the universe's more civilized species deeply uncomfortable. Commander Velrax updated the facility's welcome documentation to include a new section: Special Considerations for Training with Persistence Predator Species. It was 17 pages long and included helpful visual guides for identifying when a human was approaching a behavioral crisis point. The section on hair pulling was particularly detailed. And somewhere in the facility's archives, in the incident report that would be studied by xenopsychologists for cycles to come, there was a note in Zara's handwriting. Remember that humans domesticated themselves, which means we know exactly how to become undomesticated when circumstances require. Sometimes that's a problem. Sometimes it's precisely what the situation needs. The trick is knowing the difference. Marcus never did figure out if he knew the difference. But he got better at recognizing the warning signs, better at taking a breath before the old instincts took over, better at being human in a galaxy that didn't quite understand what that meant. Most of the time, and on the rare occasions when he slipped, when something triggered that ancient response in civilization became optional again. Everyone at least knew it was coming. They'd learned to recognize the stillness, the flat eyes, the moment when Marcus Venn stopped being a recruit and became something much older and much more dangerous. They'd learned to respect it, fear it, and, occasionally, be grateful it existed. Because sometimes, in a galaxy full of species that had evolved past violence, it was useful to have someone around who remembered what violence looked like and could deploy it with the kind of precision that only came from carrying it in your genes for millions of years. The universe, it turned out, wasn't quite as civilized as everyone pretended. And having humans around to remind everyone of that fact was occasionally uncomfortable, but ultimately valuable, even if it meant avoiding casual hair-pulling and training exercises forever after. That seemed like a reasonable compromise.